All right, we are live here at the Phys Ed Summit. This is the standard-based grading session. My name is William Bode, and Rich Wiles will be your presenter today. And you are in for a pretty cool treat. I had the honor and privilege of checking out the slides that he's presenting, and this is going to be a lot of great information, and we'll have the post to watch later. We'll have a lot of resources for you to make this a great learning experience for all of us. I want to take a second before we try to get everything out, I want to thank Spark for sponsoring our Phys Ed Summit. They have graciously donated 4 prizes that, upon completion of your survey at the end of each session, that you might have a chance to win. And so everybody that fills out the survey by October 31st will be in the drawing to win. So we're looking forward to just a great couple of hours of learning, and thank you for joining us again. Hopefully you've had a chance to use the Today's Meet or tweet. We're going to be back channeling through those 2 sources for any questions that you might have during the presentation. And so I'll be keeping up with that. And I'm hoping that now that it is 3 to 4 minutes after, most people have signed in and are ready to learn what's going to happen. So with that said, I want to make sure everybody sees the document and has a chance to sign in. If I can get to that screen, that would be great. Rich, can you see the standard-based grading resource document link up there?
Where's it at?
I am hoping it's linked somewhere on there. And, I have no idea where, but just trying.
I do not see it at the moment.
Okay, no problem. All right. Well, Rich, I'm going to introduce you, and then we are going to get started. So without further ado, I have Rich Wiles from Anne Arundel County, Maryland. He is a teacher at Severna Park Elementary School as their K-5 physical educator. He has his Bachelor's of Science from Salisbury University, and he is finishing up his Master's in Administration from, I'm going to say, Goucher College? What do you think, Rich? Is that right?
Goucher?
Goucher, yeah. Okay. I had 1 or 2. And so, Rich, I am going to turn the screen over to you, and you are on, buddy.
Well, it's a little scary seeing yourself on the screen in front of you. So, hi, everybody. I'm Rich. And today we're going to be doing some standard-based grading activities and trying to show you how to standard-based grade, what it is, and some of the cool things that will be coming to you in the future. And some of the stuff we do here in our county, we kind of feel like we're ahead of the game, and I hope to share some of this information with you today. We are going to be going over a lot of stuff. If you have any questions, please follow along on the slides, and we're going to have a side hashtag going on the side for any questions, also with the group chat. So first thing I need to do is share my slides with you, and let's see if this works. And right now I am showing it to you there, and I'm going to show you the big view. And so welcome to Standard-Based Grading in Phys Ed. And hi, I'm Rich again. We're at the Phys Ed Summit, and our hashtag is going to be SBLChat. And we are going to be going over standard-based grading, standard-based learning procedures, okay? So we're going to have some fun with it today. I guess the question is why standard-based grading in phys ed? And the reason is a lot of if you want to be, I guess my way of looking at it is if you want to be considered like the other classrooms, that standard-based grading is very important to us. Standard-based grading shows that our students can show growth, and we can see what students need to do to better understand their learning environment. So we're going to have some fun with this today. The exit objectives when you come into a standard-based lesson, the first thing you need to know is what the exit objective is going to be, and what do you want the students to be able to do by the time they leave that grade or year. I mean, that's the key with standard-based grading is you need to have measurable objectives for them to meet at the end. And assessment allows, and the cool thing is with them, it allows you to create assessments, and teachers and schools and school districts can kind of track student achievement. It allows you to evaluate curriculum. That's one thing I feel in physical education we don't do enough of is evaluate our own programs every year because, A, it's difficult and it costs money. And the other one is to provide program improvement. So we're going to be having some fun with it. And so we're going to head to our next slide. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to get used to doing this same thing at the same time deal with you, and hopefully it looks good. So it does me one second. I'm trying to not do a full screen of mine, so let's get this to the side. There we go. Awesome. So I'm just trying to get my screens together, guys. There we go. So we're going to have some fun today. We're going to be looking at the different types of assessments. When you're making a standard-based grading lesson, and you really need to know what types of assessments are out there, not just for purposes of you grading them, also for the purposes of how the students understand what they're being graded upon. And that's very important, that students understand, every different piece of that puzzle. So I'm going to walk you through some of the simple assessments that we use, and I think they're the easiest type of assessments to use with technology. And technology is a great tool for us to use, but it shouldn't take up all of our time in the physical education classroom. Physical education is a movement-based classroom. And we need to, that's always kind of the one thing when I always use technology, we need to make sure that we're doing. So then the next thing you need to know is like the differences in assessments. Formal is it's an assessment used by the administrator or the teacher, and it's to create a student grade. That's the best way to describe it. This is going to be used if you were grading them based on a standard grading system. Informal is, I think, very important, and my kids really love to do informal, and that would be your peer and self-assessments. Peer and self-assessments really allow the learner and their partners in class to really evaluate what they're doing at that moment. And that's that connection you need when kids are learning. They need to be able to understand what they're learning, and they need to take on some of, that it's their learning too. So those are your kind of formal and informal. The next slide kind of deals with is formative and summative. Formative is an assessment used to guide your instruction. A summative is like an end of the instructional period. And during the lesson, a formative assessment would be a quick one. This would be like your assessments if you were using like in technology, Coach's Eye, and things like that. Or if you were doing very simple, thumbs up, thumbs down. It allows you to assess their student information as you go. The summative assessment more is done at the end of the instructional period or end of the year, and it allows to see what they've gained over that whole course of time, which is very important. Any questions so far?
Still looking good, Rich.
Cool. The next thing the big thing in physical education is we're a movement-based class, so we should be, our kids are moving. So the best thing for us to do for assessment and doing standard-based grading is to look at rubrics. We use a 4-3-2-1, which is very similar in the state of Maryland here, where I teach, to the NASB standards, well, now Shape America standards. And it's a very easy way to grade. Rubrics are simple to create. Using this system, it allows you to evaluate your students' performance on any type of movement assessment that you would need. Rubrics can also be used if you wanted to grade on, say you're doing a written assignment, you can average out what is needed for each section of the rubric, which is very important in standard-based grading. So rubrics, they're key to physical education and key to success of standard-based learning. Okay. When I use a rubric, what I normally do is I kind of team it up with what what the standard we're going to be using is, and that's very important. So like this is a checklist that I would use off of Rubric, and these are easy rubrics that you can make, and these rubrics are what we use in accounting, and it's very simplified information that you can figure out what you're looking for assessment-wise to meet that standard. This would be a good one for offense and defensive strategies, and it would be a simple one. When we design rubrics here, we make sure that they're very simple for the teacher to use with the checklist, and a blank checklist is not bad. It just means they're average. They're working at that normal level, and you can then modify it either way. These checklisters are awesome because if you're not a fan of all the technology yet and you're still hesitant to come into that world, you could do these on paper and they still have the same effect. But you could also do this on like Google Sheets, which is a big thing, which would make a really easy task, because the nice thing with either one of them is you have documentation showing what your students are doing on those for those standards and how they're doing on each type of assessment they would be given. Okay. Next one is I like to look at peer assessments and partner assessments. This is one that was created. It's just a very simple one. It's an assessment that you could do so the kids understand what they're doing if they were doing a tumbling activity. You could take your skills, two partners and each other, and they could evaluate each other. My kids have gotten really good to the point where they can evaluate, they can evaluate each other's performance very well, and they don't take offense to it. And that's the hardest thing we have to get for kids. Kids need to be able to tell another kid what is wrong and how they can, do better at it. And they shouldn't take offense to their friends. So trying to get partner assessments in there, it's very handy, and it also gets another point of view. So hey, Mr. Wiles isn't always the one, looking at what I'm doing. My friends are too, and it's kind of important to get all those different points of views of how your performance are going. So partner assessment is very important in standard-based grading. The last one I have up here is kind of a fun one, and it's a very simplified one, and it's a pinch card, and a pinch card can be used throughout a lesson, or a touch card. And with your touch card, you can input it, and kids can hold it, throw it in their pocket, and it's a very easy way that they could assess themselves or if they need help. So the front's based on if you wanted to, and they could answer multiple choice questions in the front. You could get how they're feeling about it, happy face, sad face. You could answer true or false with it, or got it, needs help. And kids in the lower grades, especially primary grades in elementary school, need a quick assessment tool, and that's just a very simple one that they could use to self-assess themselves. But you could also use it as a summative assessment at the end of a lesson so that it's a quick cleanup. Our classes here in Maryland where I teach, I only see my kids twice a week for 30 minutes, and that is a very difficult time to, A, get all of your skill development in and assess. So using these different, simple assessments, it makes our lives easier here. And assessment shouldn't be burdening to a phys ed teacher. It should be a way to guide their instruction, and that's kind of the reason of this presentation. So those are the different types of assessments that you would have. And the next thing we're going to go into, how would you make a standard-based lesson? And that's very important. Do you have any questions on any of the assessments or anything so far?
Don't see anything right yet.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to go into before we create the lesson, we're going to go into some apps that might help you. And I know this is an online presentation, and most of us know of apps. And if you're not used to apps, just kind of work through it and see which ones that might work for you. And these are the ones I would highly suggest if you were going to go into standards-based grading and you want to use it more technology-based. The first one you should be using is, and you don't have to use Google Drive, but Google Drive's, I think, the best one at the moment out there. You can use one of the other ones, but Google Drive allows you to house all of your information, no matter what it is. If it's video assessment or if it is a kind of, if your checklists are there, you can put all that information into one spot, which is very handy. And it's good to have all of your documentation in one spot, because if you're ever questioned on how a student was doing, you could find it very simple by using Google Drive. Okay. The next one that is a very important one, it's still in the same family, it's Google Sheets. Google Sheets, if you're not used to Google Sheets, it's like Excel for Microsoft, but it allows you to, pretty much does all these same things, but it has a lot of cool features to it where you can simply make a checklist. Most of my checklists are made in Google Sheets nowadays because I can use them on my iPad, and then when I walk over to my desktop, they're still there. Google Docs is the same thing. It's pretty much Microsoft Word, and it's just another typing program, but it allows you to create it and then share it, and they're both very good tools if you're creating a standard-based learning lesson. It makes it easier for you as the teacher to help guide instruction, and it's an easy, quick way for you to assess. And assessment's a very key part, because when you're trying to grade based on a standard, and you want to figure out if they're meeting the standard, you need to have that documentation, which is very important. The next two apps are video assessment apps that I like. Both of them offer different things. Coach's Eye kind of allows you to draw arrows, and it allows you to take the skill and lets them to take a very quick view of what they're doing. The cool thing with it is it doesn't hog your memory. If you have used an iPad or a Google tablet or a laptop or anything like that, you know it takes your memory out very quickly with a large amounts of video that you have. So I like that one for that. UberSense allows you to take the kid's skill and it compares to the professional athletes. I think that's better if you were teaching like a middle to high school level. Sometimes the elementary level, I think our professionals move at such a good speed, and sometimes their technique is almost even perfected for them. It's hard to kind of explain to them at the elementary level that. So if you're middle high school, I'd say UberSense. If you're elementary, I'd say try to stay with Coach's Eye for now. But both programs are great programs that can help you and help students understand what they're doing physically when they're getting observed with standard-based learning. The last two are kind of I've been using Smart Notebook for a long while. Smart Notebook is an interactive notebook file. It's awesome. You get to create these interactive lessons with it, and kids really eat it up, especially if you project it and the kids can touch the boards in the classroom. It's awesome. You can also build in videos and stuff, so it's great if you're doing a standard-based learning lesson that you can have that, extra support there, because not all our learners are auditory learners or physical learners. Sometimes they need a visual thing on Gardner's principles, so that would be a very important one. And the other one is Google Forms. Google Forms is awesome. I'm starting to use it a lot. Google Forms allows you to create an assessment. I'm using them as an assessment, and it's like in a survey form. And the cool thing with forms is it allows you to then load it to a paper. And what we do is we just put them on the classroom in the classrooms on a basic computer in there, or on an iPad, and your kids can take their assessment of what you did in your lesson at another time, which is kind of cool. And the cool thing with forms is after they take the assessment, all that information is automatically created into Google Sheets account, so you can have all their assessment data all laid out in front of you, and then you can create graphs to see, did my kid understand the standard, and how can I better help these students, or what did they not understand? So these are like very simple apps. I know there's a lot of different apps out there. There's tons of apps invented every day, but these are just some simple ones to get you started with doing standard-based learning apps in physical education, which is very important. So from our apps, now we're going to create our lesson, and we're going to go in how would you create a standard-based lesson. A standard-based lesson is not, if you're still teaching sport units, a standard-based lesson is all you're doing is you have to just rework your thinking. A standard-based lesson means you're going to take the standard, no matter where you are, whatever that standard is, and you're going to create your lesson around the standard. Okay? Instead of saying, hey, we're playing soccer today, we're now going to be, hey, now we're going to be working on our striking skills. So you're just taking that sport model and you're now just putting it into a standard model of the skill that you're working on, or if it's a concept that you're working on. Most of the stuff in our new Shape America standards, most of them are physically and psychomotor based, but we still have that cognitive and affective area too, and you can still teach them too at the same time. So it's kind of cool. So it's the first way you would design a standard-based lesson. Any questions right now off of that? Anything?
We're still doing well. I had one question that I answered about video apps, and they're following right along.
Cool. So I'm glad everybody's enjoying the show. So how would you create a standard-based lesson, and where would you start? Well, the first thing you would start with is what your standard is, or what your skill and concept is. So this is going to be a very simple breakdown of a one of our Maryland state standards, but it's also one of the shape standards. It's a kindergarten standard for hopping, and it's one of the locomotor movements. So the first thing you do is you break down what is a locomotor movement, and it's important that kids understand, locomotor movements are the way we move, and break down that terminology and definition. So you should break down the skill that you're going to do, and then you should link it to the standard. Our standard, it's up on the screen, it's a very long standard that covers multiple things. In the state of Maryland, our standards are kind of still an overarching. We're still using the 6 standards here at the state level, but and that's what we're looking at. So what we would do is we would take the terminology here and develop the ability to enhance their performance by a variety of physical movements, and your locomotor would be under fundamental movement skills. So that's what we would be really focusing on for this standard-based lesson. So when we would take that, we would then create it so it would be pretty easy. Our objective would be something simple, student-friendly language. It'd be like demonstrate locomotor skills, including walking, jumping, running, hopping, and jogging earlier. Though we have a debate all the time around here: is jogging and running the same activity? Because there's a lot of talk. Technically, running is the locomotor skill. Jogging, kind of my personal opinion, was that activity created in the 80s. So it's a little difficult. So I guess after you have your objective, the hard thing would be you have to figure out in your head, since you have your objective of what you want to see, what is this lesson going to look like? So if you're focusing only on these locomotor skills, should you be doing other activities that are not locomotor related? So when I create a lesson like this, I only want to focus on my locomotor skills, and this is where your prior knowledge and pre-assessment would come into effect. If you could take the skills you've already worked on the year, and if we're going to focus on hopping in this lesson, we would then kind of try to figure out how to loop it all together. How would we assess the lesson? Well, that's always the hardest part, is with a standard-based lesson, you kind of have to work backwards. You should know what the exit objective is before you create your lesson, and that's a very important fact. So the way we would build it here is we would take an assessment. This is one of our state standard rubrics. They're up on the Maryland State MDK12, mdk12.org, and this is one of our fundamental movement skill assessments for our kindergartners in hopping. This is a basic rubric. So what I would do is, if I had the standard-based lesson, I would look at what my standard is looking for and the objective there, and then I would take that rubric, and that's what the end goal is by the end of the class, hopefully. I'm not going to say that with standard-based learning they're going to get it by the end of class, but this is what I should be looking at throughout the lesson. Okay, so this is what I would be doing. And this would be what I'm looking for. So if I'm looking at this rubric, they should show the essential elements for performing a hop with a mature pattern. And they should be looking at those different bullets underneath, and that's what I would be looking for. And when I take it down to the rubric with the 4, 3, 2, 1 and the NA, that would be what I'm looking for. So the consistently demonstrating, consistently evident would be they're doing all those correctly with a fluid movement. A 3 would be a little less. They'd only be showing 3 of them. A 2 would be 2, and a 1 would be less than 2. Okay, we try not to harp on if they're not getting the movement correctly, but this is what we'd be looking at if we were creating the lesson. So how I would introduce it is I would start with kids need to understand the standards, so they should understand what the cues are for hopping, and they would then that you should explain to them, and if not, this is where you could put a video model in, and you could show them, boys and girls, we're going to be working on that skill today for this standard. Could you probably show these to me in one spot? And what you would do then from there is explaining it with your objective and what you would be doing. You would then transition into a warm-up activity that includes that skill. Okay. Don't forget when you do your big intro for the lesson to define the movement skills too. Okay. So a warm-up for me would just be a simple game called Airplanes. This is an old game that's been around for a long time. It's if I'm correct, it's from one of the Great Activities books. I think that's where the original activity came from. I think it was one of my dad's activities with a couple friends. And it's a very simple game that you could do that practices the locomotor movements they've done, but it also introduces them to the hopping movements when you're playing in class and moving throughout the gym. So it's kind of exciting. You could do this simple activity to get them warmed up. From there, you would transition into some different activities. This is a book from our curriculum. It's a great book you could use. And when you're teaching the standard-based learning, your skill development should rotate around the skill you're working on. And these lessons in this book pretty much revolve around the students exploring using jumping and hopping and changing in different directions and pathways, which is important. So when we teach it, we try to give the kids options of how they would explain it, and that's very, very important. Yeah, that would be very important how to explain it. So for this, we would give them 3 options, the ways that the teacher would help students understand it. And I think teachers need to provide the feedback while we're teaching this activity, and the teacher may provide feedback often and frequently. So the way we wrote our curriculum here in the county was we made sure that the teacher understood how to meet the standard, and that it makes sure the student had models too, different ways of understanding the information. Does that make sense to everybody? So when we would show the lesson of skill development, we would then do these activities. So you would be practicing hopping. Explain the difference between hopping and jumping. One of my friends, Judy, always tells me, do frogs hop. And that's always a good analogy that you could use with the kids when you're using your skill development, and explain to them different ways. So once you have your lesson created, and you're then, this is like your performance side where they're practicing. Because when you do a standard-based learning, kids need plenty of time to practice. And that's always important, is they need to be able to practice. So make sure you give kids ample amount of time before they would do the assessment when you're doing a standard-based lesson. With a standard-based grading lesson, you would then go back to your rubric when you would be assessing them. And I would take this rubric in the cue sheet that you saw earlier. I would put these blocks in the top of that cue sheet, and I could walk around the room and grade students right off of it. And it would be a very simple, easy way to assess students. Another way that you could do it is you could have video assess this skill, which is very important. When you video assess the skill, you give another realm of documentation. And for us, that's very important in physical education, because it's hard to explain to a parent, you know, hey, I have this rubric, and the parent will ask, well, how do I know they did it that day? If you have that video assessment with the rubric, you can show them that skill that day. And that's eye-opening for a parent when they can see that. So after you teach your lesson, so we've done our warm-up, our skill development. This would be the assessment you would use. You try to link your cue sheet together with your video assessment, and you could then video assess them. Cool thing with video assessing too is if you have short amount of time, like we have 30-minute classes, we can go back later and check them out. And the cool thing, if you do that, you can then link it to like the different things. I'd love to show you this link. If you haven't known about this, PE Metrics is a great video library of skills they have. PE Metrics is the book put out by Shape America, and it's a standard-based assessment, so it's a great book. And the cool thing is online they have videos of how kids can do each skill and what the different rubric levels would look like. So this is, if you would click on this link or cut and paste it later into your browser, it would give you that video, and it would show the kids, you know, the different level, how they would do it, and it also shows the different videos that they have on that website, different ways if they make an error or how they could correct it. So it's a great way to tie all of your assessment together into that standard-based lesson. Any questions so far?
Doing well. Jen did ask from our today's meet about, with the video apps, would you give a student time to reflect on the video and what they are seeing as far as them moving?
Yes, I think that's, Jim. Yeah, you need to, when you video assess them. If I'm video assessing at the end of class, I don't have time to do that. But if you're using like Coach's Eye, you could video the student very quickly, show it to them, lay it out, and then they could look at it. Or you can just, you know, slow the video down, and that then can show the student where they're not performing correctly. because especially if you're like doing an assessment where you're throwing and catching or something, or a skill where it's more complicated, you could break down those steps very easily. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah, I use it all the time in class. And you can have students do it too, but I think there's something when the teacher works with the student to explain it better, which is kind of important. You think that made sense, William?
Yeah, it definitely did. From a middle school and high school level, we have a little more time than 30 minutes. You know, we have an hour and at least in my district, we have an hour and a half. So I do that a lot. And I even told Jen that I use a Google form to where they can watch, they can analyze, and then they can record, you know, the learning cues, what they did well, what they didn't do well. And so then I have that documentation right there that I can review a little bit later. So, Jen, thank you for the question. We have another question from Amy. It says, how and where do you store all your videos? Can you upload them to the drive?
My biggest thing, yes, you can store video on Drive. Google, I guess the issue is, I guess it's one of those things you should ask your tech department in your county or your district of where you're teaching. Some counties are more free that you can post and hold the videos on Google Drive. Some prefer you to house them on an external drive. So it depends, I think, on where you are, you know, putting your information. The cool thing with cloud storage is you can always continue to grow it. So if you're running out of space, you can do it. We only keep our videos in the county, like for my level at my school, I only keep them for a marking period normally, just because a marking period, after that marking period, parents don't normally have the issues. The only videos I do keep for long distance is if I have a student with an IEP goal from the fall to the spring. That would be the video I would say keep if you need to show that year-long progression of skill.
Right. And so if anybody out there is listening that has a one-to-one school, I find that Google Classroom is a great place for students to really manage their own videos, and it actually becomes a portfolio for them. So you can do a pre-assessment, you can do some evaluations throughout skill development, and then do a post-assessment, and they upload everything. Again, this is for the older students, but that's another area that it doesn't take any of my space on my personal computer, and everything is has a simple workflow for myself as well as the students.
Cool. Any other questions there?
Not right yet.
Okay, so that was kind of a breakdown of what you would do with a standard-based lesson. So you remember you'd start with your standard. From your standard, you would then, you would create your lesson based upon that standard. You would then write your objective, what the kids are learning for the day. You would then break it down from there to your skill development of how you would show and demonstrate the skill and how you would introduce and teach the skill. And then you would go to, at the end, using your assessment. If you wanted to go through your lesson and assess, you could do it through the video assessment of those tools, okay? So that's kind of the idea of standard-based grading. So it allows you to then take all of your information and you can kind of see how your students are doing. So the next step of the presentation is after I've done this lesson, what should I do with everything? And I guess that's always the key. We have all this assessment data, and you know what it means already in your head. If you're a good educator, you know what your students can do and everything. But why do you have this, and what's the importance of it? So our next slide is going to be, what do you do after the lesson with your rubrics and sheets? The first thing I would do is I would look at your cue checklist if you did this lesson, and with this lesson I would then see where my kids are, and I would see who showed them on this basic checklist here. If I took that cue checklist and here was the 4 cues at the top, and this is what I was looking for. The C I wrote, normally I would put a check mark in if it was on a computer, or on a piece of paper, or if it's in the computer I just put a C for check mark. But if say Rich myself is demonstrating skill every time correctly, I'm looking at data. What should I do for that kid? Because he's already mastered it. And say this is a kindergarten, it's end of the year, the kindergartner should be able to show this skill. If this kid's already done that, what should I do for him? And then if you look at Mary, who, had some different, she was missing some of the skill cues. What could we do to help Mary out in what she's doing? So it's important to kind of understand what you should do with your data. So for your students that have a stronger need, if your students do master that skill early on in the during the year, and you're using standard-based grading, progress the student to the next locomotor skill combination. Combine that walk with a hop, and then create it into a skip. Okay, add some jumps into there. Challenge the student with locomotor sequences. Can you move from this skill to this skill to this skill? And then you could always add in transitional movements with dance. Could they be doing the bunny hop or walk to jump? Add different levels to your teaching. So standard-based learning, you're looking at the needs of each individual student. You're not just looking at your whole class. You're trying to figure out what can I do to improve each student in my class. So that was if a student did meet the standard. That was some of the things you do. The thing we always have issues is, and you don't know where the students come from, you don't know their background, so you don't know how much they were exposed to, especially at the lower level, at home. So if they didn't meet it, what should you do? Phys ed, just like any other classroom, we should have some type of road to intervention for the student. And with standard-based, grading, it allows you to open communication up with your parents and also your classroom teachers, and they should be like understanding that what you're doing, and I think that's a very important thing. So make sure that after you're done, you need to have an intervention for the kid. So classroom teachers and parents need to help you, and you can help them. The way I would do it, I've had kids with like this problem before. I would take the video over to my OT and PT, and I would ask them, is there anything you see that could help them out? In the classroom, they could help by adding those different types of movement-based activities into their classroom, which would be very important. At recess, I know when my kids were having difficulty transitioning from hopping to jumping, I added more hopscotch. There's a lot of great books out there. There's a book called International Games. It's a great book, and you can make all these different hopscotch patterns from around the world. It's a great activity. So you could do that, so they could be practicing those skills at recess, or if they live, pretty much all your students live close to school, they could come and practice there. And how would you monitor it? I mean, so if you do a standard-based grading lesson, you shouldn't just be doing this assessment one time a year and then never see it again. You should make sure that you're monitoring all of your students' progress throughout the entire school year, which is very important. And I think the big thing is in physical education, sometimes we don't always do this. If a student's starting to fall, a year below grade level or 2 years below grade level standard, you might have to talk with your special education team or your support staff in the school, and you might need to set up a different plan. It could be a 504, it could be an IEP, or an AIS. An AIS is just a very simple plan. It says, hey, and we have these in our county, and they're very important. It's saying, hey, as a staff, we find ways to, incorporate into our lessons ways to make sure that we practice this information. So I think in phys ed, we have to make sure that we're hitting all of our kids with standard-based grading, and we need to make sure that we're hitting your highs, your average, and your kids that you might need some intervention. And all students can meet these standards, which is very important. So, any questions, William, on that part?
Not on that part, but Julie asked, do you have your own iPads in PE? And if so, where did you get funding for them? So maybe if you could take a minute to talk a little bit about the technology that you have in your classroom.
Okay, so originally, I've always had the chance to get different pieces of equipment to try. About 3 years ago, I was given an iPad and told, go play with it. And I guess that's always been my thing. I only have one iPad, truthfully, so I'm very protective of my iPad. Our school has gotten very into Chromebooks more than anything, with the Google atmosphere and stuff. So we have a lot of Chromebooks, and we're getting more and more iPads. The original stuff we got, you got to look for grant money. I know it's not always the best, but that's what you need to do. You kind of need to look for grant money, and that's kind of where we got a lot of our stuff from. My iPad and it's very important to keep it kind of secure to make sure you get a good case for it, but you kind of have to, I always use the motto, you got to beg, borrow, and steal to find your technology for physical education. They'll normally try to give the equipment to the classroom teachers first. And so my suggestion, Julie, just you got to kind of hunt for it, write some grants for it. There's a lot of great grants out there. Like, I know a couple of the companies out there. I know if you talk to Amazon or you talk to, like, Google, they normally have a program that you can buy them at a reduced cost. And, I don't think many people hit up GoPro or one of them that often for it, so maybe look at one of those companies. So I'm not going to lie, our county's finally getting the influx now, so I guess it's depending on how money is dispersed. So it's kind of where I got my technology from. It was beg, borrowed, and steal. I'm not going to lie, I think the chess club got me my projector in my gym, and my document camera came from another grant program that was not even phys ed funded. So get it where you can. That's the best description of it. Any other questions, William?
Not right now. That's definitely a good way, because I think I have one-to-one iPads, and that was through a school-wide initiative with technology. And before then, I was the same way. I had an iPad that I used that had been given to me by the district. I had another iPad that was given to me by another institution, and so yeah, I was the same way. It's use whatever you have. In the older levels, I actually have some kids that use their phones a lot as technology, so they have it. Might as well teach them digital citizenship. And hey, this is a good way to use your technology within class instead of Snapchatting everybody and texting everybody. So yeah, definitely glad you covered that.
So our next thing we're going to focus on, and this has kind of been my pet project over the past 3 years, it's called cognitive assessments. And most of our stuff we do in physical education is a movement-based activity, but I wanted to see if students could understand the concepts that they were being taught and make that connection between what they're doing physically and can they cognitively do it on a paperwork assessment. And what we did in the county was we've piloted, and we now are at the stage where we can check it standard-based grading at a larger scale, which is kind of awesome. So what we're going to look at are some of the different cognitive assessments we use. And the key to these is they don't take up a ton of phys ed time, but they give you so much data, and it can affect how to change your system and change your program tremendously. So what we do is we have end-of-the-year assessments. We've created one for 5th grade, and it's really awesome. It's linked to the standard-based standards, and it tests their knowledge and on the concepts, which is kind of cool. It's linked to our state standards, and it allows for us to complete that teaching learning cycle. We create these curriculums, and after we create them, we teach them, but how do we know if they're working? And I think that's always been a key in physical education is, we write new curriculum, and we teach it, but how do we know if it's really meeting the kids? So the design was to make, a test that was very simple, and it's only a 30-minute session, a 25-question test, multiple choice, and we evaluate it over time. And what it does is it allows us to see what standards our kids are really comprehending, and what standards, what are we not teaching so well, or what could we do to modify our curriculum and help it continue to grow. And that's really important. You have to see the whole cycle to affect change, and I'm a big proponent of that, and it's hard to explain to people why you would want to do that. The other ones we did, for the lower grade kids, we don't do a huge end of the year. We go for more like a performance benchmark, very similar if you're dealing with Park right now. I know some of you are taking that assessment. It's you're taking them throughout the year. You're doing different things like that. Our performance benchmarks are looking at the same thing, and they're linked to the standards, but they're checked 3 times a year, and they're shorter. And the cool thing with that is it allows you, and especially we really look at 2nd grade, because K1 and 2 are building up your real fundamental movements at the elementary level. 3, 4, and 5, you're taking those skills and then starting to apply them to activities, where then when you go to middle school and high school, you're applying them to the concepts of sport and with the health, lifetime fitness activities. So we made these benchmarks, and it's pretty cool because It allows us to look at everything. And one of the big things it allowed us to do was we have this ability now, after these kids took these assessments, we could take the data and look at how they did. And this is kind of like a snapshot of what data looks like. This is from one of the pilot ones last year, which is kind of cool. But we could take a standard breakdown, and we could take this, and this was our second assessment we gave, and we could break down to see how each kid did in standard-based learning. And we could see, what standards were we not hitting correctly. And it was kind of cool because this program allows us to show what kids got correct, which ones was incorrect. And it allows us to evaluate, did we teach it correctly, or was there an error in how we evaluated and wrote the test question? And it was kind of cool. So it's just another step you can take. So we now have the ability, just because of technology and just like the Summit, we can evaluate things very quickly. And with standard-based learning, if you look at this data, you could see what our kids are really comprehending quickly and what we need to work on. I mean, it's funny, second grade standard 1, A1, it's pretty much, do they have the fundamental movements? Yeah, the kids can perform them, but when you give them a picture and the assessment or the words that break down the skill, can they take that knowledge and put it onto paper is the best way to look at it. So that's one I guess we have to work on better in our county this next year, is we have to find ways to make sure that cognitive knowledge is applied to what they're doing. So it's pretty cool that we're at this technology piece now where we can take not just a school's data but a whole county's data and apply it and see how we can affect physical education. Any questions from there, William?
Not yet.
So the next thing I'm going to talk about is some student learning outcomes, and it's 50% of our evaluation now in the state of Maryland, and with standard-based grading, it helps show student growth, so it's not that hard to do a student learning outcome or whatever, student growth outcome or whatever they're called, wherever you're sitting and listening to this from, but it's very important that we understand how to use these, and standard-based grading can make it simple. One of the simple things I did last year was I just took the PE metrics book and I took our content standards and I kind of just merged them together, and I created a very easy prompt. And what the prompt does is I can pretty much put any of the PE metrics assessment wonderful assessments into this, and it creates a prompt, and it allows me to develop SLOs over it, and it's very cool because I could use this year after year if I wanted to. And this looks at the physical development, which is really awesome. So, kind of cool. It's something you can look at. So this one was for overhand throwing, and I was going to look at overhand throwing form using the PE metrics pages. And I would video assess my students in the beginning. I then would, I did this over a 36-week time period, so I had about 6 months to play with this, which is kind of fun. And what we did was, this is just a simple prompt that I created. It allows us to take that standard. We look at what the standard, this would be standard 1 for us, and it would be standard 1 of the new shape standards. So you could just take this and you could create an SLO based on it. And all I did was, so they pre-assessed the standard. So, and then after they pre-assessed it, we just calculated the data, and we made sure that, I made it so that there was an easy way. We're allowed to do a point system rubric here for one of our different ways to make them. So what I did was, this is the pre-assessment. I looked at different points of the assessment, so it was kind of cool, and seeing where the kids were doing stuff correctly and what they were missing. So it's kind of different. And I also added in an activity. You could do like a throwing graduation club activity to give yourself a couple extra buffer points so that you could show growth in different ways, not just on the assessment, but you could also show them showing growth when they're doing an activity in your class. So just another different thing to look at with the assessment. So mine turned out that, pre-assessment score, they did this so well, post-assessment they did this, and then was there a point increase? And in standard-based grading made this simple. I just took a standard-based assessment we had, created a pre-assessment, used the same thing as a post-assessment, and I added a couple an activity in there that could be, the monitoring piece to it, and then it just allowed you to create a cool SLO, and I can then plop and play in any other assessments out there and hopefully meet the same activity. So pretty simple on that section. Any questions, William? Are you there, William? No?
I am. No questions so far. I had muted myself because I'm preparing for the next session, but no, so far, so good. And actually, I do have a question. Here we go. Um, were your standards-based cognitive assessments and curriculum development worked on by the state, country, probably county, or district? And then as a question, team of teachers.
The assessments originally were it was me and my co-author who I write stuff with. Her name's Judy, and now we're at the point where the original idea was rough and it was hard to get people onto that assessment level. And we only wrote these assessments we wrote them because we wanted to see the change, and it was very hard to explain that to people. This year we now have a committee that reviews all the test questions, and it makes our lives very simple. So in the beginning it was a lot of work to start this process, but now it is evaluated from our county. This is only county. The state does not have anything to this level. I wish the state would create something to this level. That would be awesome. We're a national model, so pretty cool. Any other questions?
No, just to add to that is, like in the state of North Carolina, we are so far behind the standard-based grading continuum because we're getting ready to start ASWs, and that's analysis of student work, where if you're not doing standard-based grading, you're going to be behind. And that's why I love to see the work that y'all are doing in Maryland, because I'm going to use that as a guide to help lead North Carolina into the 21st century. So let me check our questions real fast. All right, so we've got another question from Carrie, and she asked, how many students are you assessing using the standard-based grading? Also, how often do you see your students?
So I assess my students each week. I have 400 kids at the elementary level. I assess them each once a week and using a standard-based model. So it's a lot of kids. I see them twice a week for 30 minutes. I normally do not assess them the first class of the week. That's kind of, we introduce the skill, we practice the skill, we do a simple exit assessment. The second class of the week is where I kind of do the assessment part, where you videotape or whatever other type of assessment you would use.
Nice. I see my kids every day, so.
Yeah, I know. I wish I saw my kids every day. So I guess the last thing I'm going to go over, and then that'll be it for today, is so I kind of had fun for my graduate work. I had the ability to check out the frequency. I wanted to see. Last year I was placed in two different schools. I was placed in a school that had two 30-minute sessions and a 1-hour session, and I wanted to figure out what was better for kids' learning ability, and standard-based learning made it easy for me. So what I did was I established the problem that, with Common Core coming into place, it's hard to schedule phys ed time sometimes, and if they're going to look for somebody to get rid of time, they're going to look at the cultural arts area and figure out how to do it. So last year I was at a school, I split schools till this year, and one school I had my 2:30s, and the other school I had an hour of class a week, so twice a week versus an hour full time. And so I decided to make it into a research project, which was kind of fun. And what I did was I had my two groups, and I did a pre-test, post-test model with it. And what I did was I tested them both cognitively, and I did their fitness testing. So I used their fitnessgram data, and I just wanted to see, how did the kids do on both in the beginning with our pre-assessments, and could they improve, or which one showed the best growth over time? And using the standard-based grading model, it helped defend why I believe, the more frequency of physical education is important. And this is kind of a thing, the defensive. If you use standard-based grading, it allows you to help defend your program and show the need for more physical education. So it was kind of cool. My research and everything showed that, hey, the 2:30s, the learning that the students understood in that 2:30s was way better than that 1-hour time period. And that really helped, in the defense, in my belief, and it felt good when the data came back and said, hey, it was right, but it's important, we see our kids more. And I think that's one thing I like about standard-based grading is if we can show that our students aren't meeting all the standards at each grade level, and we have the statistical data to back it up, hopefully over time we can have more time and our students can come, the physical literacy part is very important, and are kids physically literate if you're only seeing class, having phys ed once a week? And that's always been my big push. So I always believe daily's the best, but it's hard to get that where you are. So kind of cool. I guess the last thing I'm going to leave you on, and I found this, it's a very simple one. It's based on Common Core, and I think it's kind of matches to what we do with standard-based learning. It says the standards are like the building code. The architects and the builders must pay attention to them, but they are not the purpose of the design. The house needs to be built or renovated, is designed to meet the needs of the client, while also meeting the building code along the way. So you can approach standard-based grading in many different ways. You could, but as long as you're meeting the standard at the end, that's always the end. So that's where I leave you. If you have any other questions, you can shoot them to me at my Twitter account, which is Rich underline and Wiles, or my email is in the presentation earlier. So I think that's it for today, and we're almost out of time. The roundtable starts shortly at the elementary, middle, and high school level.
All right, great, Rich. Thank you very much for that presentation, and if you would, hopefully you'll have the opportunity to take the survey after the second session, and Rich, if you'd put that link to your Google Slides on the bottom of the resource documents, I think we'll have several people that would love to kind of review that. A lot of great information that can be used across the board K-12. And again, I thank you for your time. And it is 11:57, so that'll give you about 3-4 minutes to jump up, grab you some water, maybe do a Tabata exercise real fast to get ready for the next roundtable. So again, I thank you from the Phys Ed Summit team. Rich Wiles, thank you for your time and your sharing.
Thank
See you later, everybody.
See you.